Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander. And in the next few minutes, we'd like to talk to you about simplicity. In this world, it seems that our lives are so complex and so busy and so full of so many things. It is something that we all need to look at, and the reality that in the midst of our busyness, in the midst of our confusion sometimes, we can and we should simplify our lives. I guess that simplification is one simple way to make life a little more enjoyable, isn't it, Iris?
Yes, it is. And there are many ways we can simplify our lives, and we would each just have to look and see what it is we need to simplify. Sometimes it's just routines we set for ourselves, and they become habit, and we need to form new habits to have those routines be less complicated.
Mm-hmm. And for most of us, we find ourselves, at least as I observe people, and we talk to people a lot, that people get very comfortable in their busyness.
Yes.
And that when we really approach people about simplifying their lives, and we did a segment a while ago about choice, that choice to simplify is a hard one and a difficult one for so many people. And a lot of it has to do, I think, with the fact that we hold on to things. We hold on to things, and we hold on to people, and we hold on to circumstances and situations. One of the things at the center that I say so often is, let's move things around. Let's throw things away. And I can always see people whose eyes, kind of widen when I say throw it away, and they scurry around to try to hold on to the things. But so often we do have more than we need. We clutter our lives. And aside from cluttering our physical lives and the shelves in our homes and our offices and places, we clutter our minds.
Yes.
And we need to simplify our lives both in the physical, in the mental, and in the spiritual realm. And all three of those aspects of our lives are far, far too complicated. In metaphysical New Thought philosophy, we have a simple philosophy and a simple theology, which is summed up in just a few lines, really. And the dynamic of our minds is another area where we're so often cluttered, and we need to really be very simplified in terms of what it is that's on our mind and how it is we occupy our minds. And then in the physical, we all need to constantly be uncluttering our being in our life. You've heard me tell the story so often of Hattie Garlish, who was the foundress of our movement back in 1927, and Hattie was the most organized person in the world, had everything in its place, and she constantly was cleaning and keeping perfect order, divine order in her life. But after she died, I was the executor of her estate, and in a closet in her bedroom were stacks of boxes, all neatly labeled, and one said, "Strings too short to use." And of course I thought, well, there's no way that this box can be filled with strings too short to use. So my curiosity got the best of me. I pulled the box down off the shelf and opened it up, and sure enough, it was strings too short to use. Now, Hattie had a use for those strings, and for those who knew her, one of the things that she really loved to do was she made personal cards, and this is in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s up until her death in the 70s. She would make cards, which would be like handicraft. Of course, she had a reason to have strings too short to use, but many of us have strings too short to use that are in our lives, and we just hold on to them and never really use them.
Yes, and we can look around in our homes and see ways that we can simplify. Most of us can. And usually it's the closets that are packed and the closets that are jumbled. So when we unjumble those, our mind somehow reflects that tidiness, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think there's no way to underestimate the reality that our physical environment is mirrored in our mental environment, in our mind. And it is nearly impossible for people to live in a cluttered environment, in a disheveled environment that is just filled with things in disarray, and to have a peaceful, tranquil, ordered mind. Now, it's not impossible, but it is much easier if our environment, if our physical environment is well ordered and simple, and then it is easier to make our mental realm simple and well ordered. And by simple, I don't mean simple-minded. I mean simplified in terms of the way that our mind operates. And I think we need to be aware of that. The other area that I think we need to simplify our lives, it has to do with both our spiritual and our material life and our mental life, certainly, is how we spend our time. And most people are far, far too busy, make too many commitments, and then are constantly behind in those commitments, feeling negative about themselves, which goes to the very core of their self-image. And we know about the difficulty of self-image and the challenge that we have as a people, especially in the West, to deal with feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem. And so those all come from this cluttered reality and the fact that we don't order our time adequately. And you know and I know we're all asked to do more things than we could possibly do. And if we don't say no, and if we don't decide how it is we spend our life, then we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. You know yourself that I've talked for years about cutting back on my professional life and giving more time to the church center and cutting back here and doing this, and I've never done it exactly right. But I'm constantly trying to do that and reorder my life, because in my circumstance, I do 3 separate kinds of activities in life. And so to balance that, and then to also have a personal life, which we all need to have, is a very difficult thing. And so we need to simplify our lives in all of the areas and simplify the way we spend our time. And we need to have some quiet time.
Yes, and if we don't, we pay a heavy price, a health penalty as a rule. I was reading something earlier today written by one of the editors of Newsweek, and she was deploring the fact that all the junk mail that comes in has to be dealt with. And but she seems to do it in a very viable way. And she said once she thought of stacking all the junk mail catalogs up in a stack, and she was sure it would be taller than she was, but she was afraid to do it because it might fall over on her and kill her. But she's learned to just push it, she says, from the point A right into the waste can, because, and if she doesn't, then it clutters her life. And she doesn't, so she simplifies in that way. And she was deploring the junk mail, but you know, it's okay if people send junk mail, it's our choice. Do we want to look at it, review it, or do we want to just put it in the trash? And if we save it back, then if we save it and plan to look at it later, later usually never comes. So then we have all this too much of paperwork to go through, and it becomes quite formidable, where if we deal with it on a daily basis, and I know we've all read ways that we can save time, and one is when we receive mail to make notes in the margin so that as we answer that mail, then we don't have to reread the whole thing and get back into the specific energy of that one letter, but rather we know what it is we want to say. So there are many ways we can simplify our lives.
And we really do need to do that.
Yes.
We need to simplify our lives. And we need to, and part of the simplification of life is simplicity, and the need for simplicity in life is to give up the clutter. And one of the things we talk about so often is go through your house, through your office, through your immediate environment, and if there are things that you haven't used in a year, decide if you really need them. And if you don't need them, then get rid of them. I have a personal saying, which you know, I say it all the time, when in doubt, throw it out. And of course, people shriek at that because they think, well, people can use it and it ought to be given to a good cause, and I certainly have no problem with that. But if you can't give it to a good cause and it's cluttering up your life, then get rid of it. And that is an important dynamic of our life and of our being. And I think then the second aspect is our mind, and to give up the clutter that is in our minds. And so often the clutter in our minds has to do with the negativity of the past and fears of anticipation of the future. And so much of the clutter in our lives has to do with the past and the future. And we talk so often about the importance of being in the present moment, understanding that this is where we are right now. This is the way life is right now. This is what I need right now. And in my mind, be willing to give up the bitterness and the anger and the pain and the suffering of the past, and also give up the fear and the anticipation of the future. And of course, we all have to think about the past and the future to some extent. But when they really clutter our lives, and it's really time to simplify, and it's really time to clear up the clutter, the mental clutter that we have. And of course, that mental clutter from the past is what is just so damaging to people, because we relive it and we relive it and we relive it. And you've heard me tell the story about the lady who came to us for counseling for her divorce, and I had several sessions with her, and finally she made some comment that made me think that this divorce wasn't as fresh as I had been led to believe. And I said, when did you separate and divorce from your husband? And she said, in 1962. And this was in the 1980s. And here this lady had been living, and she was able to convey to me as a counselor that with such freshness that this event had just happened, and the fact was that it had not just happened. And so that kind of clutter and the need to simplify life, and it isn't the simplification by getting rid of that through denial but instead to really be finished with it, to give it up, and to let it go, and to move on. And though the way that our minds act and react to circumstances and situations is tremendously important, and many people have to have some professional help to do that.
Yes, and there's wonderful professional help available. And also, if they know that if they get into new endeavors, they can forget the past more easily. And some people need to just find something new and interesting, exciting to do, whether it's work or a hobby or just socializing where one would meet new people, because we need to change. If we're putting our energies into the past, then we need to change that. And we need to look to see how can we change it. And it would depend on the person, the individual, and the circumstances. But to begin new endeavors will often be the answer.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we say to people who are depressed so often is go out and find somebody to do something good for. You know, that's one of the best and simplest techniques for people to get out of their depression. And we need to get out of ourselves, and we need to get out of the past, and we need to kind of move on. And then we need to go back, because we can't, we have to deal with it. But the fact is that at the moment, in the present moment, when it's bringing us so much difficulty and pain, we need to step into a different way of thinking.
Yes, and if we don't, we pay a heavy price, because we're not keeping our consciousness in present time. We're not moving on in life. And until we do, then we're losing our energy in a negative way.
And we're letting those past experiences hurt us again and again and again. And what we know so often about the dynamic of mind is that so many people who hold on to hurts of the past and bitterness of the past, the people that they're reliving this for have long since forgotten about it. They're not dealing with it anymore. You know, this woman's husband has gone on to newer and different things. I'm sure he's not agonizing over the relationship. Perhaps he is, but that would be extremely rare. So she is living it, and she is injuring herself again and again through the process. And so the real importance is to be able to remove that clutter. And the other aspect that we need to touch upon also is the fact that all of that, this complexity of life has physical consequences. And we talk so often about spiritual issues and mental issues because that's what we're about, taking mind and spirit and putting them together. But we also understand that that mind and spirit are connected to the body, and that in the midst of our confusion, in the midst of our anxiety, in the midst of our cluttered life, we have and are inflicting upon ourselves physical injury, and we get sick because of it. And you mentioned Carolyn Mays, and of course many others have theories and ideas about certain diseases coming from mental sources, and certainly that's probably true. We don't want to get into saying that's true or not true, but we know that people do get diseases from the reality of what's going on in their mind, and that mind-body connection is tremendously important.
Yes, well, Louise Hay is one author and counselor who has made a career of that, finding, and she's put that together in 2 different books, showing what disease would come from what part of the mental problem that people have, the indecision, indecisiveness, or anger, the negative thinking, what aspect of it causes what aspect of the health problems. And there are others who have made a study of that too. So we know that it works. We know that that's the way life is. So if we just drop that negative thinking and and simplify whatever it is, whether it's in our home, our work, our relationships, in our mind about our own lives, whatever it is, when we simplify that and clean it up, then we lose that energy, and it's no longer impacting on our physical body.
Absolutely true. And during this segment of the program, we've been talking about ways to simplify your life, and we'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature that will allow you to continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through Confident Living.
simplifying our lives is a challenge that we all face. I know I face it, you face it, we face it at the center, and we face it at the hospitals we work with and all of the medical buildings and the different physician groups we work with. I guess everyone needs to begin at a simple point, and I guess the simplest point to begin is in our immediate environment.
Yes, and we can simplify our personal relationships. I know at one time I had invited a lot of various friends for birthday lunches or birthday dinners, and then I reached the point where I couldn't fit all the reciprocation into my schedule, and that isn't why I invited my friends, so they would invite me, because that takes away the fun, the pleasure, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to stop inviting friends, a lot of different friends, because it was too awkward to decline their invitation when it came time for my birthday. And that's just one example of how we need to simplify, and we can simplify our own lives. When we see something has gotten out of hand and it's no longer, it becomes a chore instead of pure fun, and it's supposed to be pure fun, then we need to change that. And it can be in our personal relationships within our home, or it can be in a lot of different ways. But we can look at our own personal lives and see what creates a problem for me, what causes worry in my life, and then decide what we can do about it. And there's always something we can do about it.
We can, and we can always simplify.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happens so often in relationships, just as you were telling the story about your luncheon, I was thinking about is holidays and how people of all kinds get wrapped up in the holidays and the obligations of holidays and the obligations of birthdays or anniversaries, and the fact that we always do it that way, so we're going to continue to do it that way. And in truth, we don't have to do it the way we've always done it. And sooner or later, we're not going to do it the way we've always done it. Whether we do it that way for 5 years or 10 years or 20 or 30 years, the fact is that if it becomes complex, if it becomes a burden, if it becomes a difficulty, if it becomes something that creates for us strife and conflict and confusion and clutter in our lives, then we ought to just change it. And we ought to change it. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's very hard to tell a spouse or an in-law or a loved one or a business associate that we simply can't do this anymore. But those are decisions that have to be made. And those come back to personal choice issues, which we've talked about. But it's tremendously important that we do unclutter and simplify our day-to-day life.
Yes, and I've heard friends talk about saying, well, for example, they're not going to exchange Christmas gifts with certain people, and they tell the people that, and then the person is very relieved. And very often, they might be disappointed, but more often than not, they're relieved too, because everyone has a busy life, and it's hard for anyone to make the decision, as you said, to make those changes. But when we take the initiative and make the change and inform the friend, then it solves not only our problem, but their problem as well, 9 times out of 10.
Absolutely. And so we can look at our environment, at our life, at our time, how our time is spent, and look at opportunities that we have to simplify. And I think in every instance we'll find something, won't we? Especially in today's environment.
Yes, indeed, because we all have so many different facets in our lives and so many ways of wasting time. And for example, if we watch a certain TV show all the time, and I don't happen to be one of a TV buff particularly, but I know friends who watch shows because they've always watched them. And then they watch more shows because they want to watch something new and different. So they're tied up with all these different shows. They even tape some so they can see them because they want to see something else at that time. And that creates a lot of negative energy within the situation. So we can just simplify in ever so many ways. And I would like to suggest to our audience, if they look at ways they can simplify their own personal lives, and it might be just the way they prepare and serve a meal. That can be simplified, because most of us think we have to do things in a very fanciful way when actually that's not necessary.
Absolutely. How we eat, the time that we spend in recreation and leisure, the time that we spend at work. I have 3 offices, as you know, at different locations, totally different locations around Los Angeles and Orange County. And one of the things that I learned years ago was that I have to have a clear desk, clean desk when I come into each office. And so in order to have that happen, I have to clear the desk, before I leave, so that when I come back, the incoming mail is there and very little else is there. Because I found years ago, as I came went from cluttered office to cluttered office, behind schedule with people to see me, and that life became extremely stressful. And so just cleaning up the environment had a wonderful impact on my personal level by coming into clean offices everywhere that I went. And so eliminating some of the clutter. Mail we've talked about, and publications we've talked about. I've given up long since trying to understand magazines and to keep up with reading. And I am guilty, and I apologize to anyone who knows me, who in the past where I've thrown away something important that's come in the mail. But I go through the mail very rapidly, and I don't open anything that doesn't look important. So there are choices that we make, and some of those choices may not be the best, but each person needs to make their own choices. And one of the things that I want to be real clear about on this program, as you said before, we don't give advice on how people specifics about people's lives. And so the things that we're sharing that work for Mike Costello or Iris Freelander, we're not at all suggesting would work for everyone. And so we have to evaluate on an individual basis whether that's a choice we want to make. I know some wonderful people who have cluttered desks, and I know next week I'm going to have lots of people calling me about the cluttered desk syndrome. So we need to be open to whatever it is that we need to do to simplify our lives. And then to simplify our way of thinking, to simplify our mind, and to bring some peace and tranquility into our minds. And if anyone doesn't have several times a day when their mind is clear and crisp and they feel healthy and empowered and at peace, then there's some house cleaning that needs to be done in the mind. And that mental house cleaning is just tremendously important, because if our minds are constantly going, if we're going from depression to elation to sadness and back and forth, and we're thinking of 101 different things, and all of us are going to be in that situation from time to time. But if that's the way our life is from morning until we close our eyes at night, then something has to happen in terms of simplifying our mind.
And if anyone who hears us would just start with their own thinking and build their own plan, then they would find at the end of the day they would be so much more relaxed, and they'd go to sleep more quickly. And a lot of people have insomnia these days. I was reading how many thousands of pounds of insomnia aids are sold every year.
Shocking.
It is shocking.
Yeah.
And so part of it is because they have cluttered minds, and they don't finish what they need to finish as they go through the day, but they save it all, and then it goes round and round and round in circles in their head. So it would be a kindness to themselves if they would just clean up their minds as they go through the day, as they clean up their environment.
Right. And part of that has to do with we have to have some quiet time. We have to have some quiet time. We have to have some time away. And for most of us, we have to get away from the children and work and the phones. And that's a hard thing to do. But we need that little bit of quiet time, whether it's a walk at noon, whether it's a walk in the morning, whether it's a quiet time in the living room at night after the children are in bed, whatever it is. Maybe it's the watering the flowers in the backyard, something that allows us to kind of step back from life and to have some quiet time.
I know a young man who works very hard with manual labor, and he waters his plants every evening when he gets home, and his wife knows that that's what he wants to do, because that's his winding down time. And he has very green and wonderful plants because he's sending them a lot of love, but also he gives them a lot of water. But we can all think of ways to deal with life and deal with our stresses, and what works for one might not work for another. Not everyone has plants, but I would like to recommend that we all need plants in our environment, because the oxygen is so much more beneficial than non-oxygen. And so as we go through life, we can look to see, how can I simplify my life? Where can I begin? And where we can begin is in our mind, and then we can begin with each room in our home, or in our office, each drawer in our desk.
And tremendously important not to think that we are uncluttering our lives when we're using compulsive behavior. And I'm thinking about the wonderful young man that you said who's watering the lawn, which is great. The person who comes home and has 2 beers or a glass or a bourbon or something every day and has to have that drink, or the person who comes home and has to have the Valium, or the person who has to watch that television, if the compulsive behavior, the person who has to shop or eat or do whatever, those negative aspects of life we need to be aware of, and we need to be vigilant of, because what we need is pure quiet time. And it's a wonderful example that you gave of nature. It's a great, if you can't be peaceful in nature, if you can't be peaceful in a quiet, good book, if you can't be peaceful in a time of meditation, those are the kinds of things that we need to do to put our minds in neutral, not the kinds of compulsive things that simply dull our mind. And we don't want to dull the mind. We want it to be sharp. And we want to be sharply in tune with where we are so that we can go back refreshed and empowered and strengthened.
Yes, and we have to give each other space. I was just thinking, that young man is able to go out and water the plants the moment he gets home, and his wife allows him to do that, and she doesn't. And she said, well, he needs that time alone. And it's a very wise woman who would know that her husband needs that time alone, or vice versa, because very often we put too much pressure on each other in a family or an office situation where we want attention from someone, we want to converse, we want to exchange ideas, when what we really need is silence and simplification of time.
Right. And we need to be able to go apart. And maybe that just means in a different room, a different part of the room, a different part of the apartment or condominium, or into the yard if we have a house. We're lucky enough to do that. And of course, walking is great. And you've been a great walker, and I've been a runner for years and years. But getting out and getting physical exercise, changing the environment in which we find ourselves, and really moving is a positive.
That is very important. The physical exercise helps clear the mind.
Physical exercise is something that we can't do without, and it's something that we as a culture have far too little of, and we know that. And so physical exercise and communing with nature, music, good books and literature, and even good friends sometimes are the things that we need. So Dr. Freelander and I have been sharing with you concepts and ideas for simplifying your life. And these are ideas that we hope are bringing you thoughts of confident living. We hope you found this information useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
This program is a community outreach of Christ Church. Dr. Mike Costello speaks each Sunday morning at 11 a.m. and Dr. Iris Freelander speaks on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. at the church. On Sunday evenings at 6 p.m., there is a meditation and healing service. Come and join us. You will be warmly welcomed.